And she said, I will run alongside the gentleman or the gentleman if they want to run, but I would like to run for him. But she was so discouraged, and she decided, I don't think I want to deal with this, because even her best friends, the girls, they also kept telling her, you can't, because we can't win. So one evening, towards elections, she decided she was stepping down, and she announced to her friend, she said, don't say that, just like going go, and I don't think I want to go to. So that evening she went and she went into the library. She thought, let me just bury myself in books. I don't want anyone to see me. So she read that evening. She read this book. I'll put it on Hilda, and then I'll put it on Hilda. I was with it will show everything. Just focus it on this with Joy, Amanda, and she told us after she read this book and she saw that discouragement that the women in this book had encountered around here, but they resisted and told just the stories that told her, no, go for it. If people don't want to vote you, if they don't vote you, that will be okay. They will have decided. But you cannot be your enemy. You cannot stand against yourself. And so she stood, and now she's the first head prefect of Luigi Giussani. Yes, first female, it's a secondary school, first female head prefect. Yes, so, and it was just the stories that the women shared. So I would like to thank you. You don't know that depth of how deep you touch the lives with your work. People talk so much about what you have written through different essays, through different anthologies that you have edited, you have collected. And so we appreciate you. We celebrate you, not just as a Ugandan academic, Ugandan writer, but as, continental figure. Yeah. And I would like to say that I will leave, Samuel is pointing at his group. I will leave him to say a lot, but I would like to say that actually, like that guy, she was the first head of the law school, the first female head of the law school, dean of the law school. Very pleasure that we all learn from, we all get encouraged by understanding her life and the things that she's had to break, the ceilings that she has had to look again. And also for your contribution to the principles of the feminist charter, because the app itself that does feminist charter for African feminists. I see her listed as among the few African women who developed that the principles that guide some of the people interested in feminism. And so I welcome you, but I welcome our moderator, Samuel Iga, a very interesting combination. On many occasions, I've spoken to Samuel and he has said, I think I love patriarchy because it balances women's power. And I always ask him, so who balances men's power? So maybe by the end of this conversation, we shall know how to balance men's power. Or if we need to balance any power. Yeah, do we need to balance any power? Do women's power need to be balanced? Is it that bad? Yeah, let's see how how we end. But also, she speaks about a lot of, if you read her book, Decolonization and Afrofeminism, sometimes you don't think about the linkages of these things. So I ended up thinking, what would we rather do? Would we rather would he is fighting forces of colonialism. If you read his poem, Africa in pain, Africa in pain, the colonialists should never have come. And if he came, and when he they should never have left the way they did, the time they did, something like that. So he is fighting colonialism. She is fighting patriarchy. They are both enabling us to understand the two concepts. At what point do we need a teaming up? And there's somewhere where she says, somebody told her, you're writing science fiction. You're writing science fiction. I found that really, I thought, okay, yeah, this is the same as when they say, or in her book, when she was writing about decolonialism, when she said she's writing about decolonization, then someone asked her, oh, you're writing sci-fi. Yeah. And so I thought, okay, maybe this is the same as when sometimes you say women and feminism, and they ask you, but what are the odds? Yeah. So let's see how we have the two concepts interact and how we shall proceed after this. I thank you all. You're very, very welcome. I hand you over to Africa.
Thank you, Madam. I'll stand up for a brief moment to acknowledge Madam Hilda. Please give her another high five. No introduction, but allow me to say Professor and everybody else here that Madam Hilda is the MD of the Uganda Women Writers Association. And graciously, Femrite hosts the Readers Writers Club here for long before Bob went grey. Now, how many shades of grey? And it is a consistent, there has been Wakadudu, Kasama Republic, there has been Gatomato, there have been different spaces where we've attempted to have a regular meetup of readers, writers. This has been the most consistent. Thank you very much. Are there any members of the board of Femrite here? Joyce, you're a member of the board. This is short for, please stand up for recognition. Joyce Wolayo, Bintu Sakite, and Betty Kaigo. I like to call her Onaula because she has got one of those outstanding poems. I don't know if you've come across the Bobo, but she's got a poem which is very close there in a different way. Most welcome. I would also like to say thank you. Any other members of the editorial board of Femrite? No? Okay. Professor, I happen to be on the editorial board of Femrite, and so every so often I keep teasing in other spaces that I sit on the board, and then I say, but I think I'm still not a member of Femrite. When I look down, I'm indicating that she gets expect me to be wearing a skirt because I don't have to wear a skirt to be a member of Femrite. Otherwise, I wish to welcome anybody who is new here for the first time. Oh, you're welcome. 5:30 to 7:30. Sometimes it gets so warm, we'll stay a little bit longer, regardless. And sometimes the lights come on. I hope they do tonight. That saying, ladies and gentlemen, we are going to host in conversation Professor Silvia Tamale. And it's really a conversation. I am only to moderate it. I'm not going to ask all the questions, or I may not even ask questions. And so I'm going to pass it back to you. But before I do, allow me to quickly pass the mic. I'll start here and move. We go like that. And everybody, please just say your name. Just your name, please. Thank you.
Please appear. You're welcome. You're done. Hi everyone, Juliet.
My name is Ruth.
Bob.
Jemima.
Martha. I'm good at marine 13.
Angel Natalie. Sorry, I love
Bill.
Sorry?
Bill.
John.
Sorry.
Jennifer A. Okech. Good evening, everyone. My name is Travel.
There you go. Thanks.
Do I get that, Mr. Kabinka?
Fortunate to serve you.
Hello, my name is Grace Polaya.
My name is Ruth Campbell.
Thank you, Joy. And go to BC.
Hello, everyone. Hello. Let's tell something of my gift.
At the back there. Thank you very much. Again, thank you for being here. And let's try and see that we get as much content as possible. And Professor, Madame Hilda has said a little bit about you. And one can read about you. But please allow me to ask you to tell us how you got to be here, how you end up here. There is a program on TV which says James. How does Professor Silvia Tamale get to get this space? Every month, we have at least one more that we post as author. We are hosting you today as author of the month of July, and we are going to focus our conversation around decolonization and Afrofeminism. But you've written a number of other books. How do you get to deal with them? How do you get to be dean of law school? How do you get to be a teacher in the first place? Everybody says girls need to go to school. You are. How do you get to be? Yes.
Thank you very much. It's an honor to be here. Why did you bring that here? Which one? Okay, which one? What's the business? First, I'd like to thank Hilda, who sent me an email inviting me for this about 2 months ago, gave me ample notice. I would like to thank you, Mr. Zinunula. Zinunula Munako, I remember that person. Yeah, we used to learn Luganda in primary school. One of the set books was Zinunula Munako. Anyway, and thank you all for making time this evening. How do I get here? Oh, thanks. Well, I was a first year law student. I wanted to do journalism, but in '82, when I joined Makerere University, that course needed mass communication. So there were very few options, professional courses, programs, and I hadn't done economics, so I could go to BCom. Law was the only option. So I took law, given my combination of HSC subject. And when I was in first year, we found a huge rift in the law school. Then it was the law faculty. A huge rift between faculty. There were Marxist-leaning faculty and liberal-leaning faculty. And of course, the majority were liberal-leaning, led by the late Professor Makubia. Was his first name? Pedro. So the Marxist-leaning professors teach us the law in the context of its political economy, teaching us that law is not objective, it's not neutral, it is serving certain interests, and here are the interests. And I found that very interesting, intriguing, because the other side was just teaching us the black letter. These ones were giving us the context. It was not easy because you had to read Capital, Volume 1, which are not easy reading, especially for someone who's just come out of the education system of Uganda as you know it. Cram, regurgitate. 3 months a day, forgotten everything. But so the Marxist law professors made a very deep impression on me. And I remember Professor Frederick Dupo in class one day talked about, he mentioned in passing, it was in passing that women are subordinated to men. Women are considered inferior. And I remember being so shocked because it never occurred to me that I am looked at as, viewed as inferior men. I'd been at Udo Junior, in Kabinja, as we used to call it, Udo Junior. So I studied with men, with boys. But I'd never considered myself inferior. In fact, I used to be one of the top 6 students in class every year. So for him to come and say women are considered, I found that very fascinating. Because, as you know, Marxism focuses on class, workers, without really looking at gender as an issue. But he mentioned it in passing, and I made sure that when I went to do my master's, first of all the lecturers were men. There was not a single female on the faculty at the time. And after he said that, I started noticing these things. So I say, I couldn't get into journalism, and now I'm here in law. I don't really want to practice, but I'm going to be on that faculty. So that became my ambition. Before I finished, I think there were 2 women who were ahead of me, who were also from Gayaza, who became teaching assistants for me. So they were the pioneers, Nightingale and Lillian. It means I was a judge now. And but they had got lower second. So that was another ambition that I got. Okay? Kind of like affirmative action. I must get there in an upper. So I studied very hard. I got an upper. I joined the faculty. very long-winded story of how I'm here. So that's how I got into academia. I went and did my master's. I took a course on gender and the law. I read all the African American feminists while I was doing my master's. I started pursuing. I got interested in feminism, and I decided I wasn't going to do my PhD in law, but in sociology as a major and feminist studies as a minor. I understood why in America the law is a postgraduate. It's a postgraduate program. Because here it's an undergraduate program. You get all these cream de la cream of academia and you put them in law school and you start teaching them the black letter of the law, which they can teach themselves, without teaching them the context within which the law. So sociology for me was important to understand how society operates, and gender and the law, gender studies is also very important. So I came back, we started a course on gender and the law at the law school. And then it became I became an advocate, activist, and my teaching was enmeshed with activism. That's how I started writing. Because in order to get promoted, you must publish. So you're supposed to publish anyway. But I published because I wanted to live. Because when you publish, you're even after you die, people will remember. You can look at it now. That's how I did.
Okay, I wish there was another mic. A moment strikes and the wave is created and reverberates on and on and on. The professor says women are considered inferior to men, and it triggers them. You had it triggered to study. Not too long ago, there's a gentleman with a cap on over there, Mr. Jagena. He's part of the Little Miss Uganda establishment, such is his specialization. And he asked me to quote one of the, what are they called? Functions, one of the Little Miss Ugandas was launched entrepreneurship journey and motivating others, very young women, actually. One of the things I said was, among other things, do not worry if you don't know yet what you want to study at university. Do not worry. Some people are lucky to know early enough, or maybe unlucky to know very early what they want to study and become. On the other hand, some people are so lucky or unlucky that they don't know until much later. Do not worry. Do your best at what you do, because we miss the journalists, but we got a law professor, so postdoc professor. But please tell me. And this is like personal to me. Going through your book, I came across new terms, and just allow me to ask you to say a little more about those terms. Then we'll go into the deep. For example, how many people have heard of the term epistemology? Oh, this is a PhD student. Yeah, I see 4 hands. Oh, 5. Only one of them is a man. Epistemology. I like that. I was telling Madame Leola the first time I heard of the term colonization, it was from Dr. Tibasima, Isaac. And then you go on. Now, why I ask about epistemology is linked to the question of history and prehistory. I was shocked when I learned that prehistory means undocumented history. Now, when we look at the question of how we get to know the things we know, I just would like you to please talk us through, take us through at least 2 terms, maybe 3. Epistemology, feminism, and how it differs from Afro-feminism.
Yeah, so when I was due to retire from academia in 20, because I decided when I turn 60, I am going to retire. I'm not going to, I was not ready to apply for post-retirement contract for several reasons. The main two were, I've been teaching for 36 years, I was tired. Secondly, the trend that our universities are taking is very, very worrying. Very, they're turning into handmaidens, really, of the state of capitalism, of the terms of life. What is the term? It's the kind of economy we have. Neoliberalism, thank you. Very neoliberal character now. So those are the reasons why I decided I'm stopping at 60, 2022. So I decided, but I can't just, in the 36 years I've taught by 2022, I've gathered a lot of knowledge, and I can't just retire with that knowledge. I need to put it in black and white, right? So initially I decided I'll take a sabbatical 2 years before my retirement and write a book on gender and the law, a course I've been teaching, so that it becomes like a text. But when I took the sabbatical and started writing, I realized that talking about the law, and what I was writing was actually in many ways reinforcing what I was critiquing. So I reconceptualized the whole book and decided I'm going to write with my target reader being African students, wherever they are. Black students, but mostly African. That is one. Two, then I had the dilemma. I want to write in an accessible fashion, using words that African students can understand. But the minute you make that decision, you realize it is much more complex. It's easier said than done. Because if you are going to try and critique, try and counter the narratives that we've been fed on since P1, since nursery school, you have to use the same narratives. Yeah, I mean, you can't critique narratives without naming, using the same narrative. So I couldn't run away from these big terms. So I decided what I'll do, I'll try my best whenever I use a big word to define it as best as I can. So I started off with some short glossary. The book, as you saw, begins with a short glossary of terms, and epistemology is one of them. They use big words to mean really everyday things, but you have to use them because you're critiquing them and they need to understand what it is that you're critiquing about them. So you cannot avoid those big words. So every time I use epistemology, I try to say, how we know what we know. These are philosophical terms. And epistemology always goes with ontology. Ontology being, what is it that we know? What is the truth in inverted commas? What is it? What is knowledge? And all those are very complex philosophical terms. But to put it very simply, Epistemology means, how do we know what we know? How do we know that fathers are the heads of the family? How do we know that men have power and women don't? How do we know what to know? So you break down, and once you've broken that down, then it is easier to reshape, to allow, to make room to learn new things. Because once you know that, how I knew that Daddy was the head of the family was in P2 in a social studies class when our teacher told us, and we took it as the gospel truth because she was the teacher, we was the teacher. And when it came in exams and they asked me who is the head of the family, and I put father, I got a big tick and I passed. But is that truth in inverted commas true for every family, for example? This little boy who was raised by his single mom, saw her struggling, working 2 jobs, rearing chickens at the back of the house, doing everything, and the father, who was somewhere in this Uganda but had no presence in their family, is being put on a pedestal as the head of the family. Just did not resonate with that little boy. But so how we know what we know is through our full avenues like the education system, which is furthering certain interests. How we know, so it is through classrooms, formal classrooms. How did we used to know things before classrooms, before the British introduced 4 walls where you enter and a teacher stands in front of you and tells you, this is your reality. Even if that reality does not resonate with your lived experience. So that is epistemology. How do we know what we know? And if you don't think about it, then you just, everything will just fit and you take it as the gospel truth. So that is what epistemology is. The other one was what? Feminism was opposed to Afrofeminism. Again, to put it very simply, feminism is, a movement where feminists believe that women are considered as subordinated to men. A society where women are subordinated to men, they're seen as inferior to men. 1. 2, they see that as wrong, because we shouldn't take this for granted. Some people don't see the subordination. Some people don't see the hierarchy. For one, a feminist knows that there's a hierarchy in society between men, how society views men and women. One is seen as superior to the other. That is 1. 2, there's something wrong with that. It is not right. It's wrong. Because again, you don't take that for granted. Some people, including some women, think that that is okay. In fact, they will fight. They will vehemently argue that that is how things are supposed to be. Look at these 5 fingers, they're not equal. That is how God made us and so on. And you can't do that. So the feminist believes that there is something wrong with it. And thirdly, all feminists act upon, in other words, they don't just stay at believing that there's something wrong with it. They do something about it. There's some activism that is involved. And the activism doesn't have to be picketing on the streets and banging saucepans. That is one part of activism. But even when you, as an ordinary woman, when you think that your husband has treated you unjustly, shouted at you in public, embarrassed you, trample on your dignity. And in the evening, when you go back home, tell him, I did not like the way you treated me. It was wrong. You didn't think about me as a human being. You're treating me. And today, I am not giving you sex. That is activism. She is acting upon that injustice. Okay, so there's a whole range. So feminists are there. So feminism is an ideology, idea of those three basic things. Now, there isn't one feminism. There are several feminisms. And what brings about multiple feminisms is really what they believe is the reason why women are subordinated. And so it's like a diagnosis and prescription approach. When you go to a doctor and you say, I have a headache, they will try to diagnose because a headache is a symptom of so many possible ailments. So they will try to find, what is it that is, to get to the root of your headache. They interview you, ask for the history, how long have you had it, where exactly is it hurting, and so on. And then they send you to the lab. They're doing a diagnosis. So in the same way, feminists will ask, why are women subordinated in society? Has it always been like that? If not, why is it that they're subordinated? Okay. And based on their answer, their strategy for changing, bringing about equity and justice in women will depend on how they answer the why question. Okay, so why are women subordinated? If liberal feminists will say it's the laws that discriminate against women. Two, it is the biases, the prejudices that society has, generalizing and stereotyping women. Therefore, for them, the liberal feminists, the strategy to bring about justice will be law reform. Okay? So the why question determines what they do. Law reform. Two, more raising awareness in society so that people know about women being, human beings and so on. Marxists will say it is the economy. Women's labor not being recognized, they work in the home and they're not paid. Therefore, they are subsidizing capital and so on and so. So for them, it will be the economy, overhaul the economy, the economic relations. So-called radical feminists, it will be the body. It is the body. Women's bodies are sexualized. They are, objectified. They are regulated. They are controlled by the patriarchy. Therefore, again, their prescription will be you need to overhaul the whole system, and women take control of their bodies and their reproductive capacities. So we have several feminisms, not just one. Ecofeminists will talk about nature and how, the exploitation of nature is similar to the exploitation of women and so on. So feminisms are many. Afrofeminism can be counted as one of the many feminisms. And the diagnosis of Afrofeminism is actually most of those different strands of feminism have some validity in them. We agree that laws are discriminatory. We agree that there's a lot of stereotyping and prejudice against women. We agree that women's bodies are controlled and regulated. We agree with the Marxists. We agree with all of them. But our biggest problem is most of those feminisms tend to look at women as one group. They focus on gender. They focus on womanhood, as if women are all similar everywhere. Now, we as Afro, Black, meaning Black, as Black women, we know very well that we are not just women. We are not just discriminated against as women, but we are also discriminated against as Black people. And these discriminations do not take turns. In other words, the system of sexism does not wait for the system of racism to work on me before it also works on me. They work on me simultaneously at the same time. So my experience of oppression as a woman is quite different from the experience of a white woman who does not suffer racism. You could add other selves. I could be disabled. I'm a woman, but I'm also disabled. So the way I suffer oppression is quite different from able-bodied women. So Afrofeminists are saying, look at intersectional oppression, because we are not made up of one self, but several selves. Okay? And that for Afrofeminism is very, very important. Now, when it comes to Africa, you know where Africa sits in the world as a continent, in the geopolitics of the world. Yeah? We also have our own. For example, the experience of African Americans in the US is quite different from Africans from the continent. The experience of a Zulu woman is quite different from the experience of a Karamojong woman. So these intersections of oppression are extremely important for African, the way we do feminism. So that's the difference. Afrofeminism is a strand of feminism that is all-encompassing, but also gives very specific attention to the intersections of oppressive systems.
Thank you very much, Professor. Really thank you. I thank you because once we have the context, then we can talk about the things we speak about. In this particular book, Professor is talking about decolonization and Afrofeminism. Maybe there were other places that were colonized, and maybe there are women in those colonizations. But you see, the Zulu, the Teso woman, for example, I learned that among the Sabine, I used to do a bit of work. Not only are the titles, is that the right word, genderized or sexualized, that if you called a girl Sebo in Buganda, everybody will look at you like, oh, you're making a mistake. And if you called a man Nyabo, I'm not looking at you, Bob. Let me look at my deed. If I say Nyabo, it might be, how do you say that? But I found that in Kapchora, there are even full phrases that a woman may not say to a man. They're seemingly normal words, but when you address woman to woman, they're okay. When you address them woman to man, they're not okay. You don't greet a man the same way you greet a woman, and not just by title, yes. I also happen to know, and I think Femrite has done a collection of stories about the question of female genital mutilation. And as Charles Onyango has written, it is that women or mothers teach the boys to be on the roadside. In other words, the mothers, by the nature of their function in terms of creation and recreation, or is it procreation, and raising the new generation, end up being the vehicles of the transference of culture and cultural practices. So when we look at it this way, allow me to ask, when you look at Afrofeminism, what really should it have as the end goal? When you look at the book, it's racism, and it made me think about Nakunta Kinte. You know Nakunta Kinte? Kunta Kinte suffered a lot and yoke of being taught to unlearn himself and relearn himself. Toby Kunta Kinte. Toby Kunta Kinte. That was Kunta Kinte. We didn't see what Nakunta Kinte, if you'll allow me to use the term. You understand what I mean? We didn't get to see graphically what Nakunta Kinte went through. But Professor says the Afro woman suffers a double jeopardy in that colonization, colonials added to the question of the woman being inferior, patriarchy, end up placing her squarely in the shooting circle right there, and such a big circle you can't miss. So I ask, at the end of the day, what should we aim at to extricate our people? Not only the women, actually. Maybe let me say this before I give you back the mic. My last question would be, so what do we do? But let me say this. Madame Hilda said, a strong believer in patriarchy. In another space of adults, I've said, show me one man who has not knelt before his woman. Then I'll show you a man who doesn't know his woman at all. And recently, there was a general, allegedly from the Congo, who was stepping out into the car, and the wife stepped out. And when the guards tried to stop her, she brushed them off, grabbed him by the hand, and tore them off and marched back into the house. That's enough. I find the woman by nature, if you're a sensible man at all, you've got to acknowledge her power. That's the line from which I come when she says, I'm a strong believer in patriarchy. I'm a strong believer in the fact that the woman is very powerful, biologically, naturally, psychologically. I think she could even kill without shooting a gun. I may be using very strong words, but when I look at the double jeopardy of the Afro woman, it's more than double, it's multi jeopardy. When I look at the fact that when you look at all the Abrahamic religions in Islam, even if it's a little boy of 4, as long as he has learned to walk, he should escort you to the market. You don't go alone. In Christianity, it's a pity Madame Nyanjura has stepped out. But
coming back.
Her name is Mutatina, and I know a little bit about her, like everybody does, about everybody. But when you look at the Islamic way, the Arab way, if you look at the Christian or Old Bible way, when you look at it's Mount Jeopardy. So what should we aim to do? When we look at the ontology of things and we look at the epistemology of things, practically, how do we go about this question of decolonization vis-a-vis feminism stroke Afrofeminism?
I think we know the fact that Africa as a continent is lagging behind all other continents, and Partly it's because of our own making, but the bigger part is the legacies that we inherited from colonialism. Beginning with the balkanization of Africa into 54, 55, 56 countries, whatever the number. That was done very deliberately in 1884-85 when they sat in Berlin at a table with rulers and started dividing our continent among themselves into very small pieces of land compared to the whole mass. 54 of them. And using the strategy of divide and rule in everything that they did. So even within, after dividing and separating families, separating ethnic groups, separating, they used ethnicity, tribalism, religion, nationalism, and so on to divide, so that we don't act as a group. And we see that legacy very, very clearly today in bold relief in South Africa, for example, where they're killing fellow Africans and saying, you're taking, go back to your homes, you're taking our resources, taking our jobs, and so on. So the problem of Africa is so big and so complex that you cannot extricate it, you cannot separate it from, so you cannot separate feminism from the bigger African problem. Okay? So when we say, what are we to do? I think the first thing we need to do is to very clearly understand what the problem is. We need a 2020 vision. All of us, from the youngest to the oldest, to know what's the problem. Because if you don't know the problem, then you just be groping in the dark, trying to solve problems in a very scattered way. So it will be truncated. You're trying to do this in the economy, you're trying to do this in the, in the social arena, in the political arena, but you're not connecting the dots. So many of us, thanks to our upbringing, thanks to the formal education system, thanks to the religions that were imported into our society, thanks to so many things that colonialism introduced here, we are no better than frogs in a forest, which are tiny, hopping in this vast arena and just looking at all these stems in front of it. So if each stem, for example, represents a system of oppression or represents a roadblock to your progress, you are only seeing singular, you're seeing them in singular stems and not connecting the dots. What we need to do is to become like eagles or hawks, flying, soaring up high above the sky, looking down at the forest and seeing how the branches interlink, how the dots connect. Because if we only see, if our vision is a tunnel one, we are not going to solve our problem, whether it is feminism, racism, disability, and all their intersections. We will not be able to connect the dots because actually they are interconnected. So part of, in this book, I don't just talk about decolonization. So although the title is decolonization, if you notice in the book, I keep talking about decolonization and decoloniality. Maybe I should begin there, but it's just giving the basic difference. In putting it in very simple terms, decolonization is about, or colonization. Before we talk about decolonization, we all know when those people came here and took our land and took our resources. So taking the physical resources, taking the physical and having power over us, putting us in line. That is colonization. So decolonization is pushing them out and we becoming independent politically.
What you call flag.
Flag independence. So we got a flag, we got an anthem, and we broke, open champagne and celebrated that now we are decolonized. We have got our independence. So it's about that physical taking and having power, and then decolonization, they've gone away. Physically, they went back to the metropole, England. Now, coloniality, on the other hand, was not stealing our land and our resources, but what they did was also steal our mind. So coloniality is about stealing minds. And in many ways, stealing minds is way worse than stealing land, because our minds were stolen. And when they steal your mind, they've got you. They don't have to be here. They can go back physically, but they still have you. They won't be here, and you will still be arguing that we wish they did not leave us. Because your mind has been, how did they steal our minds? Through education. The book, in the chapter on education, I try to explain how they stole our minds and how they continue to steal our minds. So when you get that scholarship, go to America, go to England, continue with your education, it's part of that stealing your mind. They are teaching you the principles of capitalism so that you come back and practice them here without even thinking twice about it. Because for you, those are the principles, the only principle. The principle. Okay? So you go, education is a big one, religion is another. We had our own religions, we had our own spirituality, and we could hardly differentiate between our spirituality and our culture. They work together. And in ours, we African traditional religions never tried to win over other people to join. That's the way that Islam and Christianity does. So you wonder, why is it so important for Christianity and Islam to win over more people, to have as many people as possible to convert to their religion? Why is it so important? This proselytization, the word that is used. You're in a taxi minding your business, and this person is coming to a window and say, "You will go to hell if you don't." Why is it important? We had our own religions, but nobody forces anyone. Buddhism doesn't force people. Hinduism doesn't force people to join there. But these Abrahamic religions forcing people to join is not by accident. because religion becomes a vehicle for furthering the interests of those imperialists, without any doubt. So we had our own religions, they came here and they forced people to convert. How did they force people to convert? If you don't convert, you will not be admitted into our schools. If you don't convert, you will not get treatment in our hospitals, in missionary hospitals and missionary schools. So people were forced to convert. Okay, but when you convert, then you are forced to listen and to, and when life becomes so hopeless, religion really becomes your only relief. That's where you release. So in that sense, religion plays a very important part. Otherwise, all of us would be mad what's going on in the world. So I'm not saying drop your religion. That's not my point. The point is I'm pointing out the vehicles that were used, the tools that were used to steal, to capture our minds. Religion, education, media, what else? They reshaping our cultures. I have a whole chapter on customary law, and how our customs were very alive, and they would evolve with changing contexts, but they wanted to pin them down and say, this is your custom. And those customs in many ways were being reinterpreted to suit patriarchy. So there were many avenues, many tools that were used to capture our mind. Unfortunately, 64 years after Black independence, shockingly, pitifully, we have done almost zero to alter those systems. We have not overhauled our education system. Yes, we are still teaching our kids that John Speak discovered the Nile. What? Nonsense. No, you're laughing, but in 2026, we are still teaching using the discovery approach of teaching history. Those Bazungus who came here and found people who already lived there and knew about these, not only they changed names, they claim to have discovered those natural, and we are still teaching that. So that gives you the idea of how they captured our mind. I mean, you have to give it to them. It was a fantastic, very effective strategy that they used to capture our mind. Because they don't have to be here now, we are doing it for them. Through education, we learn the principles of economics, and critically, we start employing them. We start using them. They will give a big scholarship to the brightest economic student to go to Harvard or wherever, study Chicago principles and come back, become the governor of the Bank of Uganda. They don't have to be here. And you use the exact principles that IMF and World Bank wants them to use. And they'll, so we just need, so what do we need, to answer your question, what do we need to do? We need to have clarity of how they captured our minds so that we know how to claim back our minds, so that we stop believing in the lies that they tell us through education, religion, and so on, so that we see clearly what the problem is, and so that we do not act as small entities within Africa, these balkanized small countries, but we act as one voice. Because as we know, Africa is the richest continent in terms of resources, not just natural resources, but also human resources. But because they captured our minds, we are too busy fighting each other, killing each other. So that clarity, decolonization and decoloniality go together. So we may say we were decolonized, Black independence, but in many ways we're still tethered to those same oppressive systems that the imperialists introduced here.
Very much, Professor. You know, he mentions in the book that up to today, Francophone elites, they remit and keep their foreign reserves in France. And they will have to get approval to access. And even when they do, it's not as if they get what you get from your unit trust. As if your unit trust makes money here. It's mostly capital that goes and works something else. And if we were to follow the liberals, the so-called privatization, government doesn't do business, one might think that then we might try and beat them at their own game. And so make sure that we've got our own public corporate entities that we have our shares in, and the capital is here, and profits stay here, but they don't. It's much worse in Francophone countries, as if it's any better anywhere else. But anyway, thank you, Professor. When you talked about education, she quotes Ngugi wa Thiong'o, probably one of the most favorite writers I've come across. Education. Berlin of 1884 was effected through the sword and the bullet. But the night of the sword and the bullet was followed by the morning of the chalk blood. So this so happens by coincidence. About 10 days ago, I started a hashtag. I'm very poor at social media, but on WhatsApp, I'm able to post what they call an update. About 10 days ago, I started hashtag I have found. And today says, someone has laughed at me today. I find that the more I grapple with Adam and Eve, the more I get to contemplate Chintu. And then under it says, Aleta Maua. Those of you who don't know English, you can consult your name. The thing is, we've got people, even who go as far as saying Boko Haram, the acts are violent and condemnable. Is that the word? But probably the spirit is the right spirit, but we've got to think about it in terms of, is that the kind of education? And we're not saying that's what Professor is saying, I'm asking the question. And so before I ask her any other question, Honorable Dorinio, welcome back, or Honorable Mutati, you're welcome back. There was a particular point I wanted to make while we were out. Maybe I'll get an opportunity. Thank you, later. I'm going to pass the mic. Let's give 2 or 3 questions to Professor before I pose more on this particular question of becoming clear. It's a very interesting analogy that she has given to us. To me, it's very interesting. A frog in the forest, looking at every trunk for the obstacle it is, not realizing the interconnectivity between the different trunks. And even if this frog was to bypass one, that there will be another. Whereas if you've seen it all and you have at least got a good image of what it is like, then you might be able to draw a more effective strategy. Thank you, Professor. Let me take 2 questions. By show of hands, I've got one, I've got another there, and another one here. Okay, so I'll start. The light stops me from seeing the first. Yes, I think it's a good idea, actually, that you could stand up and take the mic instead of the mic coming to you. and then everybody can see you. I'm starting with the gentleman here. Sarah, you had your hand up. Let me start with the gentleman here. I'll go to the lady there, Bridget. I come to four, and then I'll end with you, Sarah. Sarah. Introduce yourself. So my name is Bint. I said they are frustrated poet. So professionally, I teach mathematics. Actually, Professor, I'm happy to be in your presence. I'm sorry I'm late. One of the things the white man is known for is coming early. So one day I find colonialism. My question is, a lot has been said about capitalism. A lot. And I've never had anything positive about it. My question to you is, what is the alternative? And second, for certain disciplines such as mathematics, and particularly being the education sector, what is the alternative as far as imparting these mathematical principles is concerned to our people here? And third, don't go back there. Please. One last thing. If I make it and the white man sees me and really likes my ideas and they take me out there and they give me the job and send me back here, I mean, away from the grand scheme of things, should I feel guilty for excelling in their eyes? Thank you. Bridget?
I forget this one. Let me answer. But it's still fresh. Another strategy that the colonialists use after our minds through education, which I write about, was to create these silos so that our learning is in silos. For example, BT has specialized in mathematics, and because he's a mathematician, he has not had the chance to, for example, to grapple with sociological concepts and feminist concepts. And when we learn in silos, you continue with this tunnel. So mathematicians will not be sociologists. They will not be. That's part of the reason why I was very deliberate in doing my PhD in a different field. Yes, because I think maybe that's why you're struggling for it. The joke, but all of us should be learning mathematics, literature, sociology when you're at university. All these, because all of them are relevant to your medicine. They should not be siloed. So I think that is the first recognition. We need to recognize that in many ways, that is an impairment, all of us, because our focus, our vision, our reasoning capacities are limited by our so-called disciplines. You talked about that's one. The alternative, yes, in the book. If you get the just read the book, that's what I think we should put our heads together to think about the alternative. But I give the example of Ubuntu as a philosophy. Ubuntu is a philosophy that is shared not just by many, many African communities and cultures, but also many so-called underdeveloped communities from the global south. And what Ubuntu is really about is recognizing the humanity in everyone. Recognizing the humanity in everyone, respecting that humanity, and recognizing that we are all interconnected. So if you abuse me, you're not only abusing me, but you're abusing yourself. That is how Ubuntu works. That it's like a spider web. That if you break one thread of a spider web, you're affecting the whole web. I am because we are. You are because we are. We are part of each other. So the dignity and respect of everyone and the humanness of everyone must be respected. That is something that is completely alien to capitalism. Because capitalism, it uses lenses that sees individuality. Everything it says an individual. Me, I. Competition, who wins? Whereas Ubuntu recognizes solidarity, interconnectivity, and the humanness in everyone, regardless of whether they are disabled or not, regardless of whether they are homosexual or not, they are human beings. So there's a big difference. It's the lens with which they view the world. Capitalists view it very differently from Ubuntu philosophy. That one.
It goes on to say, what's wrong with me coming back with their education and excelling at what I do, thriving on their wages?
In the limited time that we have, I don't think I can answer. I would just urge you, please, try and so
Yeah.
yeah. Try your best, and even if it's 1 page a day, because what is wrong with that is it is what was used. Education, as I've said, is a big part of what was used to steal your mind, our mind, all of us, including myself. And putting ourselves very deliberately into the path of unlearning what they have taught us in order to shift the ways of thinking, in order to shift our ways of knowing, in order to shift our ways of doing, takes very deliberate, intentional processes. So to say that what is wrong with me excelling in there, when you excel in their ways of doing and ways of knowing, you are perpetuating the oppression, the exploitation, the hierarchies that they introduced, imperialism and colonialism.
Thank you, Professor. Please, if you saw some, just the name and then go straight to your question.
Hi, everyone. Hi, my name is Silvia. I'm a writer, and I'm also a gay person who is trying to be a gay activist. My question is similar to that of Clint, was about capitalism. When I was reading the book, I'm just starting. In chapter 1, you mentioned something about a term you said is global finance capitalism. And while you're here, you talked about how there are different forms of feminism, radical feminism, ecofeminism, and other forms of feminism. And we're kind of saying we should learn the intersectionality in all forms of feminism. And in answer to Clint, you said the solution, another alternative to capitalism would be Ubuntu. To my question, as a gay person and who is also a feminism, I'm very young at this. I think I've been a gay person for about 5 years. I learned about feminism. I'm beginning to practice it in the 5 past years. So I would say I'm a baby feminist and all that. So my question starts to pick up from Vince's capitalism question. I want to ask as a gay person, and you encouraging us to learn the interconnectedness of all forms of feminism. you think it's wrong, or do you think there is an utopian world whereby you don't have to rely on, because if you're saying the alternative for feminism is capital is Ubuntu, I feel like that's a specific term for Afro-feminists, because the Africans, they can identify with Ubuntu. And as an African, I'm just getting used to Afro-feminism. I wonder, is there a way I can sympathize with white feminists, like as a baby feminist, a way I can incorporate the ways they get activism in my ways as an African? Because you're kind of saying, I don't know, yeah, is there a way I can sympathize with a white feminist to do my work? Thank you.
So the dominant ideology of white or Western feminism is liberal. It's the dominant one. It's most of them practice liberal feminism, which the first one that I gave, laws and stereotypes about women and so on. First of all, when I say Afro-feminism, it's not just taking valid points in all the different feminisms. It's the intersectionality, the intersectional aspect of it is arguing that their sexism is only one system of oppression based on patriarchy. Okay? So if you just focus on sexism, on gender, like many liberal feminists do, you're not going to get it right, because human beings, I am like you. I don't know what your gender identity is. Female?
And binary.
Okay, let me not confuse. Let me be very simple. I'm a woman. I identify as a woman. Okay, that's one identity. So the system of patriarchy, sexism, will oppress me. But I am uneducated, maybe lower middle class. My experience of sexism is not the same as that rural woman